The last remaining riders gather. Ren, Shinji, Asakura. Kitaoka is nowhere to be seen. Kanzaki explains that there are only 3 days left in the rider battle. Once those 3 days are up, the wish can no longer be granted. Ren and Asakura prepare to fight, but Yui steps in and yells at them to stop fighting. If Kanzaki won't stop, then she will. Yui stands on the edge of a building. Then a monster takes her into the mirror world. Kanzaki has taken her until the battle is over. Well, I made it sound dramatic, but Ren and Shinji rescue Yui in like 5 minutes. What actually is dramatic is the entire mystery of the Kanzaki family. When Yui and her brother were young, they had neglectful parents who would shut them in the attic. All they would do in that time was draw. Eventually, Yui became ill and died. A mirror version of Yui asked to go over to the real world, but if she does, she will disappear on her 20th birthday. Kanzaki agrees. Mirror Yui enters the real Yui's lifeless body, causing an explosion in the house, so Mirror Yui would never remember this incident. After that, Kanzaki got taken in by family in America while Yui was adopted by her grandmother. Yui tells Ren, Shinji, and Kanzaki that instead of drawing a world of monsters, she should have drawn a world where people were happy. Yui then fades away for the last time. Yui never wanted any of this. Kitaoka tells Goro that he's thinking of retiring from being a writer. Even though when Mitsuru begged to quit, Kanzaki wouldn't let him, but whatever, I'd let Kitaoka get a free pass too. Kitaoka tries to call Raiko to have dinner, but Kitaoka doesn't have much strength in his hands. Still, Kitaoka prepares for his date, but he says that he needs to settle things with Asakura. Goro doesn't want him to, but Kitaoka made his decision. He's partly responsible for making Asakura a writer, which is why he can't leave that stain on this world any longer. A swarm of monsters begin to attack the city. Shinji is there and saves a little girl, but he gets severely wounded. Ren and Shinji enter the mirror world, but while fighting, Shinji begins to feel weak. Shinji wakes up in the real world with Ren holding on to him. It seems like Shinji has finally found his answers. He wants to close the mirror world. He knows it will cause people a lot of grief, but he wants to do it anyway. That would be Shinji's wish. Ren yells at Shinji to continue living. Shinji never thought he'd hear Ren say those words. With that, Kido Shinji succumbs to his wounds and dies. Kanzaki tells Ren that he needs to settle things with Odin as the final rider. Asakura sees Zolda in the mirror world, so he transforms. Asakura uses a final vent and is able to land a direct hit, but Zolda doesn't get up. The Zolda armor shatters and reveals Goro. Kitaoka lays on his couch, lifeless. Asakura stands in the real world. Guns are pointed at him. He picks up a metal rod and begins to run. Guns are shot. The psychotic killer Takeshi Asakura is now dead. Ren goes to Kanzaki's house. Kanzaki says that Odin is his stand-in since Kanzaki doesn't have a physical form anymore. Ren transforms and begins his final fight against Odin. Yui begs one last time for Kanzaki to stop. He finally realizes that everything he's done and everything he will ever do for Yui has been pointless. Kanzaki and Odin disappear, making Ren the last Kamen Rider standing. Eri's eyes open. She sees rings on her fingers as well as Ren slumped over on the wall. Eri tells Ren that he's gonna be cold if he stays like that. Ren says nothing and stays motionless. Kanzaki tells Yui that he will do it all over again and continue to try to grant Yui a new life. Yui just tells him to stop, but he doesn't want to lose her. Yui says she's always right beside him. Always. In a way, Yui's wish is granted as both the young and adult Kanzaki siblings draw pictures of being happy. At Ori Journal, the team is hectic as they try to gather information on their newest scoop. Then a realistic and relatable character arrives. Late as always. We then see a handsome lawyer win another case. A realistic journalist accidentally bumps into a university kid. They apologize and go on with their day. A fortune teller says that his predictions are always accurate, so some crazy guy kicks down our journalist friend's bike, simply because it vexed him. Our friend bumps into a dude wearing all black exiting a cafe. They share a scene and the journalist goes into the cafe. We then see a picture of Yui smiling happily with her brother. Everything is reset. The riders, the mirror world, and the monsters have ceased to exist. One more thing. Thank you, TV Nihon, for allowing everyone to watch this season. Kamen Rider Ryuki. Rumor has it that Ryuki was declining in views and could have faced a possible cancellation. I couldn't find any official word on this, and the only times I do see this are from multiple different forums. However, I wouldn't doubt it if this was the case. Agito was incredibly well received and made millions in merchandising, so Ryuki is fighting an uphill battle from the start. Ryuki is a very different kind of show that tried very different ideas, and coming off of Agito would make it difficult to follow up with anything as successful. I'm bringing this up because Ryuki's alternate endings may have been a result of its nearing cancellation. Ryuki's multiple endings are a main selling point, along with Ryuki being similar to Battle Royale, but I'll get to that in a bit. How much of these endings are true or 100% canon is either up in the air or completely up to you, except for A New Life, episode 50 of the show. A New Life is officially the true ending to the overall story of Ryuki. I'll talk about it last because there's so much to say about it, but for now, there are 4 endings shown between the season with movies and specials, then there are 2 more endings that you could read through SIC Hero Saga. Let's talk about each ending since some people are confused about them, so I'll try my best to explain each one. First up, episode final, Ryuki's summer movie. Most would tell you that it starts after episode 46, but I'll tell you to watch a bit of episode 47 to get a bit more understanding behind Yui. And we can assume that every event from the show happened up until that point where the movie starts. Anyway, Ryuki's season only showed 10 out of the 13 riders. Where the other 3 were, I can only guess they died off screen, never got their decks, or simply never existed. Episode Final showed 2 of these riders, Fem and Ryuga. Aside from that, episode Final also gives a bit more insight on Yui's past. A big difference is that in episode Final, Yui entered the mirror world on her own and made a deal to come back, whereas in A New Life, Yui died of an illness and her brother was the one that took Mirror Yui's deal. Analyzing episode Final makes Kanzaki's motive a bit more hazy. Yes, he still wants Yui back, but how does he know about any of this? There are also some strange decisions, such as having Asakura die by a brand new rider, Kitaoka being able to forfeit the battle completely, and Oda not having an appearance in the movie at all. I blame all of this due to being written by Toshiki Inui, because he didn't have anything to do with the show, but if I were to try to give any explanations, I would say that Ryuga was strong enough to actually kill Asakura, Oden wasn't needed for Kanzaki in this timeline, and Kitaoka is cool, so whatever. And Toshiki Inui's tropes are very well seen in the movie, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. Aside from that, let's really get into the ending of the movie. Episode Final's ending is left ambiguous as Ren and Shinji are the only riders left alive to fight mirror monsters. And that's it. We don't know what happens after, but I think that's okay. I personally don't mind if endings are left open to the individual. I do think it's a little lazy and I would rather have a definitive ending, but again, this open ending isn't all that bad. And to be perfectly honest, this is my favorite of the Ryuki endings. Not only does it make the most sense to me, but I prefer the bittersweet feeling of Ren outright saying that Shinji is his only friend as they ride off to their possible last moments. If they do live, then it will make sense for Shinji to return in later crossovers, but crossovers aren't usually canon in the first place, so take that as you will. Overall, I think episode Final is an alright ending, but I can see why others may dislike it, because it does end pretty ambiguously. I'd say watch it if you're interested in how it plays out, and I think it's a pretty good movie anyway. Next, the 13 Riders special. This one is a bit different as it's a retelling of Ryuki's story from beginning to end in a 1-hour special. Over the course of a couple days, Shinji gets his deck from the previous Ryuki user, meets other riders, and gets faced with 2 decisions. All in all, the 13 Riders story isn't very good as it feels very rushed and unnecessary, more so than episode Final. We don't really learn anything new about anyone. Well, there is one bit where Tezuka and Eric may have dated before the rider battle, but much like the other endings, they may not be canon in the first place. Well, I doubt it's canon at all, cause it would have been brought up in the actual show. Another thing I'll get back to later is that for a rider battle, we rarely see more than 4 riders on screen at the same time. And while the special doesn't have every rider in the final battle, it does have a good majority. Like, I think there are only a couple missing. But 13 Riders is also different in that it has 2 different endings that viewers voted on to be aired. During the final battle, Ren dies in Shinji's arms, so Ren gives him the Kamen Rider Knight deck. At this point, viewers could decide whether Shinji continues fighting as Knight or destroy the core mirror, which would destroy the mirror world itself. The core mirror is a thing only in the special and it sounds stupid, so I'm glad it wasn't added to anything else. Seriously, one floating block of glass that resets everything? I bet Yui was the one that thought of that. Anyway, the decision to keep fighting won out by 100,000 votes, so I guess people are sadistic and love to see Shinji suffer. In this ending, well, Shinji literally just keeps fighting. The remaining riders use their final vents, and the last thing we see is Shinji prepare himself. I bet people were hoping for a final stand kind of thing where Shinji will kill off as many riders as he can, but then got disappointed when it ended on a cliffhanger. Yeah, this ending sucks. I like the idea, but quite literally nothing happens. In the other ending, Shinji is able to shatter their mirror core so the riders disappear, including himself. We see him walk down the street until Shinji notices riders in the windows. He looks down and notices that he's holding the Ryuki deck. Shinji yells, and it ends. Another cliffhanger. This one isn't that much better, but at least there's something to talk about. People assume that Shinji shattering the core mirror caused some kind of time loop, and that's also the explanation I agree with. But that's what I've heard for every ending. Shinji being in a time loop for each ending we have. This time it would be breaking the core mirror, but the other times would either be by a wish or by Odin using a time vent card. It's an interesting theory and one I really like. I don't see anything too faulty in that logic, so I'll just keep it as headcanon for now. But there are some problems with it. Back to 13 Riders, I wouldn't recommend it unless you're really interested in seeing Kamen Rider Verde in action and if you're just dying to see more Ryuki. And I mean really interested in it. There's not much of substance to see in 13 Riders, but it's interesting to know that voting for a different ending was as early as Ryuki. We won't see it again until Showa vs. Heisei in Kamen Rider Gaim. The other two endings we get are from reading SIC Hero Saga. Yeah, reading. Good thing I can just tell you instead of making you read. Advent Calendar introduces Shinji's twin brother as Kamen Rider Ryuga. Shinji ends up as the winner of the Rider War and wishes to revive all the people who died in the war. It sounds like something out of a fan fiction, which is why I don't recommend it. Again, unless you really want more Ryuki. A lot of it seems like it was written in a day with no thought or reason to anything besides wanting to use more Ryuki characters. I had a comment saying that the reason there was only a mirror version of Shinji in episode final and no one else is because Mirror Shinji was a spirit of Shinji's dead twin brother, which also sounds like fanfiction, and I won't accept it, mostly because each separate timeline doesn't really cross over for the most part. They each stay in their own canonicity, so Shinji having a brother would have definitely been brought up somewhere if it was actually considered canon to the show. The other SIC story is called World of If. In this story, Shinji himself gains the Ryuga deck and goes on a rampage. Eventually, Ren as Odin saves the day with the help of Yui as pseudo-rider Alternative Zero. Odin kills Alternative Zero without knowing that it was Yui, and since Ren was just a puppet, Odin was the winner of the battle. Of course, meaning that Kanzaki ultimately won, but since he accidentally killed Yui, he doesn't wish for anything and instead just mourns her death. It's a bit better than Advent Calendar, but not by much. It sounds just as fanfiction-y. Although it's interesting to know that there's an ending where Kanzaki actually wins. I just wish there was more of it rather than him not using his wish. I can recommend reading World of If, since it's short and at least somewhat interesting, while Advent Calendar is just boring. Both of them do introduce survive forms for Oja and Ryuga, so that's cool I guess. Now to what you've all been waiting for. Ryuki's officially canon and truly definitive ending. Episode 50 from the show, A New Life. Everyone dies and time gets reset to when no one knows each other and everything Mirror World related is gone, including the writers. It's not directly stated how time got reset, but there are a few theories. In case you couldn't tell by now, Ryuki is a very theory-centric show. One theory says that after Kanzaki realizes that everything was pointless, he used Time Vent to reset everything. I personally don't think that's right, because if Kanzaki actually is able to change time whenever he wanted, he would have used it more than once in the show. You could say that he wants to see everything play out no matter what timeline he's in, but that also sounds just as pointless. And Kanzaki could have ended up in other alternate endings. And I do somewhat accept it, but not to the point where other people think it's the official theory. I rarely say this phrase, mostly because I think it's rude, but I don't really care what Kamen Rider Wiki says. We don't see or hear Kanzaki himself use time vents, so as far as I know, Kanzaki himself didn't reset the timeline. Another theory is that Ren is the one who wished to reset everything, which I believe to be the most logical. Some might debunk it by saying that Eri only woke up because that's what Ren wished for, but Eri's woken up before during the show's run, so Ren could have gone to the hospital, noticed she's alive, and wished for the reset. Which is why the reset happens shortly after Eri wakes up in the first place. And we see the wish manifest itself next to Ren when he defeats Soden, so it couldn't have been Kanzaki. But again, no official confirmation. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that the ending is as important as the journey, but I also think that they should be judged separately. When it comes to the infamous reset ending, I honestly don't mind. If the journey was fantastic, then why would you say it was a waste of time if the ending didn't satisfy you? And the same thing could be said the other way around too. If the ending was mind-blowing while the journey was mediocre, I'd still accept both for how they are and vice versa. Although I do believe that the journey has to have at least some substance to make the ending matter more. I haven't found an exception to this yet. Heck, I didn't even mind the Mass Effect 3 ending since the games are fun in general, and Ryuki is no exception either. Although I'd say that the journey to ending rule goes quadruple or maybe even infinite for Ryuki especially. Multiple endings are a big part of Ryuki, but they're kind of a letdown. None of them really add much, and when they do, it ends up being superfluous at the end. For example, does it really matter if Shinji and Yui ended up being childhood friends? Yui doesn't seem to care, and Shinji gets sad for about 2 minutes. We find out about Shinji having a twin brother, but it's never talked about in the show, so unless you read the story, would anyone really care? Yes, it's okay to have something that the canon timeline doesn't have, but they have to at least have some value, whether it's canon or not. Like, what if the revelation of Shinji and Yui being childhood friends also affected Kanzaki in some way? Kanzaki could have some sort of vendetta against Shinji and maybe have a fight scene between the two. Or what if Mitsuru was Shinji's ally from the beginning? What if Ren turned out to be in cahoots with Kanzaki? What if Kagawa is actually able to seal the mirror world? See, there are an infinite amount of different ideas you can have with Ryuki's stories and characters, but we get some of the most vanilla and fanfiction-y stories to be officially from Toei. The only alternate ending I can really recommend to anyone is Episode Final, but I recommend that more as a movie rather than alternate telling of what could happen. Ryuki really dropped the ball when it came to having alternate endings. They were barely endings and the differences were minimal. Speaking of dropping the ball, the story itself isn't all that great either, and I feel like that could be my own fault. I overanalyze a kid's show so I can tell the internet about it, and analyzing a show like Ryuki is a good and bad thing. It's good to point out the rights and wrongs of a show. It's good to try to be objective on a show so you can tell others about the show you just watched. It's good to have an opinion and explain why you think certain aspects of a show are good to you. But it's bad that doing all of this could ruin your experience. Man, I hate the Ryuki Survive arc, but other people say it's amazing. What am I missing? Am I just looking too deep into these things? Well, aren't I supposed to be analyzing this? Why am I not enjoying Ryuki as much as other people? Why do I think the story isn't all that good? Let's be completely honest with ourselves. The story and plot are kind of bland. I'm not gonna say it's a battle royale ripoff because frankly, that's just a stupid thing to say when Ryuki does have its own identity. Looking at Ryuki, it's a story about heroes and villains with drama, but it's not told very well. The pacing is somewhat bad, but not unbearable. At least, not until the end. It's definitely not as slow as Agito. Then I read online comments. One in particular said that Ryuki has zero filler and it's a really good season because everything ties together perfectly. But it doesn't. I looked through my notes and I analyzed the show as best as I possibly could. You want to know how many episodes I didn't talk about? I'm going to tell you anyway. 12. There were 12 episodes in this 50-episode show that I felt weren't important enough to talk about. Want to know how many episodes I skipped talking about in Kuga and Agito? 4. In total. Ryuki has a lot of filler. A lot of filler. So much filler that when looking back at the summary script, I noticed that I could cut it in half and still not miss anything important. That's the bad part. I did enjoy a lot of the episodes, but analyzing them kind of ruined my experience. Overall, the story itself isn't all that great and is filled with plot holes. However, you could look past it if you just want to have a good time with Ryuki. At that point, whether it's a good or bad thing is up to you. I stated earlier that another big point of Ryuki is that it's basically a Kamen Rider battle royale, so you may be hoping to see a lot of conflicts and head bashing between 13 characters. Well, at the very most, you get a couple of scenes where there are 5 riders on screen at the same time in the show. Oh, but they don't fight each other. It's usually a 1-on-1 or a 2-on-1. Even when getting close to the end game, not very riders actually fight each other. The only time we see more than 5 riders at once is during the 13 Riders special, but it doesn't last that long. So if you're hoping to see a real all-out rider war, well, best wait until we get to Kamen Rider Decade. And even then, prepare for disappointment. Okay, so what if we don't see multiple riders fight at the same time? The riders themselves are cool, right? Man, I'm really proud of that transition. Shinji is your average everyman, more so than Yusuke and Shoichi before him. Shinji doesn't have much skills of his own and he just so happened to become a rider. He's someone everyone can relate to. Shinji is so realistic because he wants to stop the fighting and will do anything necessary. Except, that's not realistic. That's something from a fantasy story. I believe people are naturally good, but it would be rare to see someone as pure and as selfless as Shinji. Well, aside from Yusuke and Shoichi, but that's why they became main Kamen writers for their own shows. It's a fantasy. I don't mean to crush your dreams, but Shinji is a main writer because he's so unbelievably perfect. At least, until the end. Shinji is a very love him or hate him type of character. I really didn't like Shinji in the beginning. Oh no, another pure but down-to-earth characters? Haven't seen that one before. I had enough from Shoichi alone, but Yusuke also had the same trope. Shinji just wants to stop the Rider War, but then he begins to change. He realizes that his will to stop the Rider War is an unrealistic goal, but he still tries anyway. Then he really sees that people like Asakura cannot change. When Shinji decides that all he can do is fight, he tries to fight, but no one wants to, so he begins to break down. Shinji's only goal left is the only choice a guy like him has. To at least attempt to seal the mirror world, but without the need to sacrifice anyone. Shinji can't be the naive kid anymore. He had to grow up. That's a good character. That's what I want when I hear the term realistic for a character. Being realistic means being able to change, even if it's minor. Being realistic in a war doesn't result you in staying the same cheerful, happy-go-lucky person from the beginning. When I saw Shinji start to shed tears because he just wanted the war to be over, I realized that, yeah, I like Shinji. He's a character I can relate to. He's someone I can truly call a good role model and a true Kamen writer. Ren is the opposite. I liked him in the beginning. He seemed so interesting and cool in a schoolyard kind of way. OMG, isn't Ren just the coolest edgy character ever? Yeah, way better than Shadow the Hedgehog. Except, it got old. Frankly, it didn't get old until the middle of the show, but Ren did get annoying. He went from acting calm and cool to acting like a middle school girl. He constantly wants to fight Shinji and there's never a good reason for it. Boo-hoo, I have to fight to get my wish. Come on, Shinji, fight me because no one else feels like it. I thought Ren would be better than that. Justifications I read about Ren is that he's supposed to be the opposite of Shinji. They're two sides of the same coin, you could say. Okay, can Ren, be written better then? He could have stayed the same from the beginning. It's okay to keep characters the same if they're well written. And Ren was, but no, he has to change to be Shinji's opposite because a writer is pretentious and thinks that it's absolutely genius. Another Kamen tried to justify Ren by saying that if Shinji didn't join the battle, Ren would have been fighting as selfishly as everyone else. What's that supposed to prove? That it really is possible for Ren to be a better written character? Ren is more whining than me at times, and that gets twice as annoying. I liked Ren, but man did he get annoying. Kitaoka is similar to Ren, except Kitaoka is actually well written. He's an egotistical, womanizing lawyer that doesn't want anything to do with the lower class. It would be very difficult to do an awful job at writing a fun character like him. Kitaoka stays the same from beginning to end, except he does it for a reason. Kitaoka's wish is to live longer because he's terminally ill. It's never said straight out what he has, but you can tell it's painful for him as he loses strength to even hold a phone. Not too many people know that Kitaoka has an illness, so it's even more tragic that he can't do much about it besides hope to win the Rider War. He's an egotistical character with an underlying tragedy that he can't share with anyone. It's even more sad that even though he fights to get rid of his illness, it's the same illness that kills him by the end. You're gonna notice this as I go through more writers, but most of them have ironic deaths. I already love Kitaoka by personality alone, but knowing what he has to go through just to survive makes him my favorite writer in the show. As for Kitaoka's butler, Goro, yeah, I like him. We don't know too much about him, and the reason why he stays with Kitaoka is more of a throwaway line, but he's still a pretty cool character with a fun yet serious personality. Goro should either run a company, wear a bee costume, or open up a fruit stand someday. My second favorite writer, Asakura, Kamen writer Oja, doesn't have much to him. He's a crazy guy that does whatever he wants. That may sound bland and generic, but how he's presented is absolutely insane. He's been wrapped up Hannibal Lecter style and is still able to knock out a few police guards, so Asakura is just a fun, crazy guy. Honestly, I can't justify talking about Asakura. I really don't like saying this either, but he's someone you need to see rather than me telling you. I mean, he took an entire restaurant hostage and had a gun pointed point blank at a young girl. He's insane, and that's all you need to know. Those are the four main writers that you spend the most time with, so these ones are gonna go by a lot faster. The exclusive writers, Verde, Femme, and Ryuga, well, who really cares? They don't do much. Except Femme, I would love to see her in the show. Because, well, she has an actual personality. Masashi Sudo, Kamen Rider Scissors, is pretty much the tutorial fight. He's there just to show you the rules of the mirror world. Fight other riders, feed your monsters, or else you die. His personality is the one-note power-hungry type, so there's not much to say about him. Miyuki Tezuka, Kamen Rider Raya, the only other person I wanted to stop the fighting. He was Ren and Shinji's ally for a bit until I realized that he wasn't needed. I liked him because he's like Shinji except Tezuka is already grown up. He doesn't need a change, which is why he was able to selflessly sacrifice himself for the greater good. It's a shame he died so early. He would have been a good mentor character to Shinji. Jun Shibaura, Kamen Rider Guy, is sort of like an Asakura Jr. Jun is crazy and tries to have fun, but he's a kid, so he acts like one. He wants things to go his way, but then Asakura, the other truly crazy guy, gets in his way and kills Jun, and Jun is kind of a mean jerk. I love to hate Jun. Satoru Tojo, Kamen Rider Tiger, is like a better Ren. Tojo is edgy, but he has his motives because he wants to be seen as the hero. In that aspect, he's a little crazy, but also kind of tragic. He kills his only friends because he thinks that'll make him stronger and it's too late before he realizes that he was wrong. Tojo's another okay character, but much like every other writer that gets like 2 episodes, he could have been fleshed out more. The rest of the university lab crew are kind of one note with the hero aspect. The original alternative doesn't do anything. I didn't even need to name him. Kagawa is the more level-headed and fair when it came to being Tojo's mentor. I liked him. It's unfortunate that he and the other alternative didn't add much and died just as fast as they were introduced. Mitsuru Sano, Kamen Rider Emperor, is my third favorite of the writers. He was only in literally 2 episodes, but I still think he was fleshed out enough to be considered a good character. He was a neglected kid with nothing ever going right for him, so his only wish was to be happy. Simple, yet effective. He would have been better if he lasted longer and if we were shown a bit more about his life before being a Kamen Rider. It still bothers me that Kitaoka is able to forfeit freely, but Mitsuru gets the bad luck and is still forced to fight. I guess Kanzaki is just showing favoritism. Speaking of Kanzaki, he never transformed into Kamen Rider Odin, but that was his stand-in for the battle, so let's just say Kanzaki is Odin. Kanzaki is one of my favorite villains in Kamen Rider. He's always so calm and he rarely shows his crazy side. It seems like Kanzaki is always one step ahead of the writers as he pushes them to do everything he wants. He's the one who tells Asakura to kill Tezuka and he pushes Ren to keep fighting for Eri. However, Kanzaki does make a few mistakes, such as handing Shinji a survive card for no apparent reason, but Kanzaki does everything for his sister, so he may have his heart in the wrong place. Or the right place, depending on you. As for Yui, I think she's one of the worst characters of the show. She doesn't do anything, more so than the other writers that don't do anything. I'd even argue she does less than Sudo, Mitsuru, and Alternative. Yui is boring. At some points, I wonder why Shinji wants to waste his one wish on Yui. There's nothing to say about her. She's just boring and doesn't do anything. Oh yeah, she saved Shinji like twice, but who cares? Honestly. But she's not as bad as the Ori Journal crew, minus Raiko. They're comic relief that aren't funny, and they waste time. There's a reason why I barely mention them at all. Raiko is alright. I didn't mention her that much either, but her side stories are pretty entertaining. Throughout the show, she slowly starts to learn about mirror monsters and Kamen Riders. You're on the edge of your seat as she barely misses Shinji transform. You don't want her to find out, but you also want her to succeed because she needs this one story to be successful. It's really fun, and her interactions with Shinji's friends are also pretty great. I like Raiko. I've talked about a made-up rule about the journey versus ending, but I feel like I can make a similar rule to story and characters. The story can be bland, but the characters alone can make a show worth the watch, and that's something I can say about Ryuki. The plots and day-to-day stories aren't that entertaining, but seeing these characters in those situations make the show worth the watch. We don't get very many scenes of multiple characters just sitting down and talking. It's usually a one-on-one talk, but seeing a group talk is a highlight. Very late in the show, we have Kitaoka, Ren, Shinji, and Asakura just sit down and talk. No fighting, just talking, and I loved it. I do wish there was more of it, but these characters alone really do carry the show. Now, I've been talking for a while, and I've been saving this part for those who really cared enough to stay up until this point. I appreciate all of you staying, and I hope you take this with an open mind. Nostalgia. I'm sorry to say this, but Ryuki isn't as great as you remember it to be. Yes, it's a good show, but I've seen dozens and dozens of people praise Ryuki to be one of the best seasons. And remember, It's okay for you to think it's the best. It's okay for you to disagree with me. But when I see comments absolutely trash Dragon Knight just for not being Ryuki, it makes me really sad. I expected more from the fan base, but maybe I shouldn't have. I've talked to people who have recently watched Ryuki and people who only remember watching it a long time ago. Unsurprisingly, the people who watched it a while ago thought it was pretty good, while people who watched it recently, like myself, liked it, but not as much. I know it's nostalgia that carries the show for some people, and while it's completely okay for you to feel that way, I don't think it's okay to be blinded purely by nostalgia goggles. Ryuki has a lot of problems, but that's okay. Even my favorite season, Kamen Rider Gaim and Kabuto, have a lot of problems, and I can understand that. I'm just not gonna say that it's good purely because I watched it while it aired and that is the most perfect thing to ever come out of Kamen Rider. Much like Shinji, it's time to grow up and realize that everything just can't go your way. Again, it's okay for you to disagree with me. And again, Ryuki is a good show. Just don't trash someone else's opinion just because it's not yours. So on to something less depressing. I've had dozens of comments and requests asking me to cover one specific thing. While I was only planning to give it a quick glance, I think I should do a very quick compare and contrast. As most of you know, Ryuki got adapted into Kamen Rider Dragon Knight for the Western audience. I'm not going to say too much about it right now, but trust me, I will pretty soon. Ryuki and Dragon Knight are two very completely different things. The only things they share are suits and minor plot points. Other than that, it's sententious to say that one is outright better than the other. One might do things better, but you should just give each one a chance. Anyway, what Ryuki does better is having more memorable characters. For the most part. I remember each writer in Ryuki and their backstories. I can sympathize with them when I want to know what they're gonna do in the next episode. That's not to say Dragon Knight doesn't do this either, just that Ryuki does it slightly better. Where Ryuki fails is the storytelling. The pacing is so weird. It's slow in the beginning and then it speeds up and then it just drops in the endgame. Out of the 10 writers we see in the show, 4 of them die in episode 50. Gee, I wish there were episodes where we could stretch that out instead of doing it last minute. And again, Ryuki has a lot of filler. So, out of 50 episodes, that's a lot for a Kamen Rider season. Out of 50 episodes, yeah, not a lot is really shown to us. And that's really all I'm gonna say about Ryuki vs. Dragon Knight for now, because it's time for final thoughts. For those who know me, I've been doing nothing but complain about Ryuki for the month that I've been watching it. I even said that it was worse than Agito a few times. Is Ryuki really that bad? No, I was mostly just trolling. I actually don't hate Ryuki. In fact, it's now in my top 10 Kamen Rider seasons. I love Ryuki's characters. The suits are awesome to see in action. I couldn't wait to see what Kanzaki had up his sleeve just to get his wish. I didn't even mind if characters just sat down and talked. They were that interesting. But I hate Ryuki's bland stories. A lot of characters were either boring or cannon fodder. Why couldn't Shinji learn to change early in the season rather than wait last minute? And I can't stress this enough, but there really isn't much to say about the story, and a lot of characters really are superfluous. But overall, I can recommend Ryuki to those who've already seen at least a couple seasons of Kamen Rider. I wouldn't say to watch it as your first unless you want pseudo nostalgia, but Ryuki is worth watching. There's gonna be at least one thing here for everybody to enjoy. After all, there are 13 writers, you're bound to at least enjoy one of them. I want fans of Kamen Rider to at least give Ryuki a try. If you don't like it, that's okay. I understand 100% if you don't. If you enjoy it, that's okay. I'll fanboy along with you. Kamen Rider Ryuki is a good show. Not as good as others make it out to be, but good regardless. And I want you to give it a try. With all that being said, join me next time when we dive into the mirror to fight the fight with Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. God, that was cheesy.